Hi, I'm here. Okay, the boys start the war. Chapter 4. Okay, I can't wait to find out because last time the boys found out that Caroline was really alive. And so I am really anxious to find out what they do because they were tricked. Okay? Chapter 4 Conversation. This, said Caroline to her sisters as the Hartford boys headed up the sidewalk, was our greatest performance yet. What do you mean, yet? Asked Beth, pulling a paperback from her book bag to finish before school. The Fog People, it said on the cover. I'm not going to spend all my time dropping you in the river and hiding you on the bridge. But they believed. They really, truly believed I was dead and buried at sea. The look on their faces when I came out from behind you. If we could carry that off, we could do anything. We'd make a wonderful team. The four Hatford brothers were growing smaller and smaller in the distance. They hadn't said hello or welcome to Buckman or anything at all. They just gaped, their mouths wide open. Eddie whirled her baseball cap around on one finger. You know they'll try to get even. We are even. They dumped dead fish and squirrels on our side of the river, and we spooked them into thinking I was dead, said Caroline. She almost wished they weren't even because she had so many wonderful scenes yet to play. There must be 150 ways she and Beth and Eddie could fool the boys. Boys made such wonderful audiences, they'd believe anything. Buckman Elementary was an old building of dark red brick that didn't look anything like the new school they had left behind in Ohio. Quaint, said Beth when she saw it. Dismal, Eddie proclaimed. Caroline hadn't decided what to think about it until she passed the auditorium with its high stage and its velvet curtain. She stopped in her tracks and stared. Back in Ohio, the only auditorium was the cafeteria. There the stage was a foot off the floor with no curtain at all. Here there were fixed rows of seats for the audience, the kind you saw in movie theaters, and the curtain was maroon on one side, gold on the other. She knew positively when she saw it that somehow, sometime, on that very stage, she and Beth and Eddie would perform, and that she, Caroline Lenore Malloy, would have the leading role. What she did not expect was that she would find herself in the same classroom with one of the boys across the river. She didn't even know his name, but she recognized him from his sneakers this morning. Welcome to fourth grade, said the large woman at the front of the room, a woman as round and rosy as an apple, whose name was, incredible as it looked there on the blackboard, Miss Applebaum. If Caroline weren't so precocious, she would have been entering the third grade, because she was only 8. But she had learned to read at 4, subtract by 5, and when she was 6, she was in first grade only a month before she was transferred to second. If she was surprised to find herself in the same room with one of the boys across the river, however, the boy himself seemed even more astonished. His eyes grew as large as turnips when Caroline came through the door, and his face turned petunia pink. So for those of you who don't know what size turnips are about that big. They can be smaller or they can be bigger, but they're about that big. And petunias are pretty sunflowers that you see in people's yards. They plant every year. Okay? If you can remember just one thing, class, we'll get along famously, Miss Applebaum was saying. When I talk, you listen. Now, the first thing we're going to do is sit you alphabetically. I sure hope his name isn't Mahoney or something, Caroline thought, watching the boy. Miss Applebaum was calling out names of students and pointing to seats, one after another in the first row. She called out, Wally Hatford, and pointed to the first seat in the second row, and the boy took it. Wally Hatford, huh? Caroline said to herself. Well, the Hatfords would soon find out they were no match for the Malloys. Miss Applebaum was filling up the rest of the second row, and when she called out, Caroline Malloy, Caroline realized that the apple-shaped teacher was pointing to the desk directly behind Wally. Caroline quietly took her seat, and hardly dared move. She was sure that the moment the teacher's back was turned, the boy would turn around and say something so awful, so embarrassing about Caroline and her sisters tricking him and his brothers, that she would be forced to think of something awful and embarrassing to do to him next. Wally did not turn around, however. He said nothing at all, and Caroline could not stand it. He kept his head pointing straight forward, hands on his desk where he was holding a ruler between his thumbs. And as Miss Applebaum droned on and on, Caroline leaned forward and blew ever so gently at the fine hairs on the back of his neck. This time she saw goosebumps break out on Wally's skin. Caroline smiled to herself. She leaned forward even further until her mouth was just inches away from Wally's left ear, and she said, "Wally." The boy did not move, but his ear, both ears, turned bright red. "Wally," Caroline whispered again, just behind him. "There is a gigantic black spider with 8 hairy legs dropping down from the ceiling about 5 inches from your head." "Where?" Wally said, throwing back his head and crashing right into Caroline's nose. "Ow!" she yelped, covering her face. "Caroline Malloy and Wally Hatford," said Miss Applebaum, "I don't believe either of you is paying the slightest attention. What's wrong?" "There's a big spider coming down from the ceiling over my head," said Wally. "She told me." He seemed to be trying hard not to smile, but Caroline could hardly think because her nose ached so. Miss Applebaum came down the aisle and stood beside her. "Let's see this gigantic spider," she said dryly. "A spider like that we should study in science. Where is it?" "Gone, I guess," Caroline said, still holding her nose. It was bleeding a little. She hoped it wasn't broken. Actresses with broken noses never got the good parts. "Since Caroline and Wally have cost us some class time, I think it would be fair for them to stay after school and make it up," said Miss Applebaum. "If you see any more big hairy spiders, Caroline, you may collect them in a paste jar. And if you hear any other girls telling you about spiders descending over your head, Wally, I suggest you pay no attention whatsoever. Do you want to go see the nurse, Caroline?" "No," Caroline answered, snuffling, and spent the rest of the class with a tissue wadded beneath her nose. She didn't see her sisters all morning. When the 4th grade was doing arithmetic, the 5th and 6th grades were having recess. When the 4th grade was having recess, the 5th and 6th grades were having lunch. It was halfway through the afternoon when Caroline happened to pass Eddie's class in the hall on the way to the library. She grabbed her sister's arm and said, "Eddie, is my nose broken?" "What? Is it crooked?" "No. What happened?" "Wally Hatford." "What?" cried Eddie, but by this time her classmates were well down the hall, and she had to run to catch up. What bothered Caroline most about her predicament was that she wouldn't be able to walk home with Beth and Eddie, and would have to wait and tell them about Wally Hatford banging her nose. At 3 o'clock, everyone left except Caroline and Wally. "What is so wrong about not listening when I'm talking?" Miss Applebaum said to them. "Is that you disturb other students as well." Caroline stared down at her desktop. She wondered how old it was. There were all kinds of things scratched in the wood, initials and numbers and little cartoon faces. "And because listening is the most important thing in my class, and talking out of turn is so distracting," Miss Applebaum continued, "I want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Come up here, both of you." Caroline got woodenly to her feet. I wonder what that means, woodenly. I would imagine that's kind of stiffly, maybe. Miss Applebaum wasn't going to paddle them, was she? She didn't think she could stand the humiliation. Wasn't that against the law? Or could teachers do things like that in West Virginia? She followed Wally up front where Miss Applebaum was placing 2 chairs face to face about 3 feet apart. "I want you to sit here," she told them, "and I want you to talk to each other for 10 minutes. Perhaps at the end of that time, you will have said everything there is to say, and there'll be no more disturbances in our classroom." No, Caroline thought. She would rather be paddled. 1 minute would be bad enough. 5 minutes could be cruel and unusual punishment, and 10 was torture. She lowered herself sideways into one of the chairs. What was she supposed to say to a boy who, up until that morning, had thought she was dead? Miss Applebaum stood with her arms folded. "Well, I'm waiting." Caroline crossed her ankles. "You started it," she said to Wally. "What did I do?" he said sideways to himself. "Dumping all that dead stuff on our side of the river. So you pretended to die?" "Is this a normal conversation?" asked Miss Applebaum, as she picked up a box of supplies and headed for the closet at the back of the room. "No," said Caroline, but she was talking to Wally, not her teacher. "This is not a normal conversation because you and your brothers aren't normal human beings. Normal people don't go dumping dead fish and birds around the neighborhood." "It wasn't my idea," said Wally. "Well, actually, it was my idea. Dead fish, I mean. But it was Jake and Josh who. So none of you are normal?" "We're not normal?" said Wally, his voice rising. "What do you call people who go burying each other in the river? It was a great performance, and you know it. It was dumb. You believed I was dead. I believe you are crazy. We'll see about that. Whatever you two are arguing about, you better get it out of your systems right now, because when you come to school tomorrow, I expect you to pay attention," Miss Applebaum called, sticking her head out of the supply closet. "You and your dumb brothers," Caroline muttered, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. "You and your stupid sisters," Wally said back. "We're smarter than the four of you put together," Caroline told him. "We'll see," said Wally. "If you just left us alone instead of dumping that dead stuff, things would be okay," said Caroline. "If you'd go back to where you came from, there wouldn't be any more trouble," Wally replied. "Excuse me." "Oh, yeah? If you went back to where you came from, you'd be in a cave." "That does it," Wally said hotly. "The war is on." "Okay," called Miss Applebaum, coming back to the front of the room for another box. "If you two have settled things, you may leave now." She looked from Caroline to Wally. "Unless, of course, you are not agreed." "We agree," said Caroline emphatically. "The war is definitely on." She could hardly wait to get home and tell her sisters. What she discovered when she got outside was that she wasn't the only member of her family who had been kept after school. Eddie had stumbled over Jake's foot in the cafeteria, and sure that he'd tripped her on purpose, brought her tray down on his head. Beth, of course, had waited for Eddie, so they were again, the three of them, coming home late on the very first day. Mother was dusting shelves in the hallway. "Whatever happened to your nose?" she asked Caroline. "She bumped into something that needs a little fixing," said Beth. "Needs a lot of straightening out," put in Eddie. "Well, how was school?" Mom asked. "Ugh," said Eddie. "Ugh," said Beth. "It has possibilities," said Caroline. "Oh, it's starting to get